Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our council meeting for November the 25th. It's 5 p.m. and I will call things to order. Got an agenda before you. Do you have any revisions or additions? Chief Cody?
We have the addition of one in-camera land item, and then I'm proposing a minor reordering that we would start with item 6B, the introduction of Mauricio Reyes, prior to the request for decisions this evening.
Very good. So just to be clear then, in-camera items now, there's 2 land ones. We have 3 is the correct number?
That's correct. The
Very good.
Third item.
Councilor Jacobson?
Sure, I move we adopt the agenda as amended.
Thank you. Director Duke?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I believe we were going to reschedule the affordable housing presentation as well.
I think that we can adjust the scheduling of that so that it comes up under presentations. I'm assuming where you would prefer for it to be. Was it the idea?
We had, at one time, we had discussed reordering the agenda for convenience of one of the staff members attending, but I see that we have members in the gallery who are interested in the affordable housing strategy, so I think we'll just leave it as is today.
Very good. Any other items for agenda? We have a motion before us, and all those in favor? Unanimous? Thank you. So then you've got an exciting announcement for us.
Yes, my apologies. I was just texting the staff member that is affected by the reordering there. So it's my pleasure tonight to introduce Mauricio Reyes. Mauricio is our new Senior Manager of Financial Services and joined the city November 18th. Mauricio comes to us from the city of Grand Prairie, where he served as the Senior Financial Analyst and was involved in all things to do with the budget, asset management, and overall city finances. Prior to joining the city of Grand Prairie, Mauricio held a variety of finance-related positions in private practice, school districts, and with the county of Grand Prairie. Welcome, Mauricio.
Thank you.
Mauricio, I had an opportunity to speak with you a couple times and thank or welcome you personally, so now publicly, it's a pleasure to have you on board. We look forward to working with you. I think I speak on behalf of all council. Wish you all the best, and hopefully we'll be able to get you and your family settled here shortly.
Thank you,
Welcome aboard.
Okay.
Yes, item 5.1.
Chief Cody, council meeting schedule, have some adjustments to be considered there.
Yes, so council was recently given the opportunity to attend a tour of the Edmonton International Airport Economic Area. The meeting will happen with our local MLA, and it is scheduled for December 2nd, which will preempt our previously planned meeting for that same date. It was a committee meeting with no items of particular urgency, so we are recommending publicly advertising these change to the proposed schedule.
Thank you. I think there was some colleagues from Anoka as well, Mayor Bonnet, and some councillors that were maybe going to attend as well.
Yes, I believe that is correct. My apologies for leaving that.
So if anybody is put forth, Councillor Ross.
So I'm assuming you want a motion that council cancel the Monday, December 2nd, 2019 committee of the whole meeting.
Very good, thank you.
Sorry to twist your
Anyone care to speak on that? All those in favor? Any opposed? Yes, thank you. And just while we're on that item, that was circulated earlier by Chief Gowdy, and everybody had an opportunity to respond as to whether or not they were interested in attending. You heard from everyone, very good. Councillor Jacobson?
Sure, so I just wanted to speak to the second part of this request for decision here, and I appreciate it. I believe this was in response to a comment I made at the last meeting. And again, my reason for requesting this was, again, in going through our budget process, I realized I would have, again, appreciated a much more informal setting to hash out a lot of ideas with administration instead of doing it post hoc like we've done. Because my sense was that as more and more councillors' ideas on certain things came out after all the work had been done, that it probably placed a tremendous administrative burden, on the staff to go back and redo these things. So I know that lots of other councils, have one or several, for lack of a better term, pre-budget committee meetings, just frankly to get a sense of, what councillors' priorities are, for that year. I mean, we all have the conversations anecdotally amongst each other, but I just thought that a committee meeting to have a much more informal discussion about priorities and hear back from administration would be very useful for administration as they go about the very onerous task of preparing the budget. So that's why I requested it, and I genuinely appreciate it being brought up here as a motion. So I'll make the motion. That council schedule committee of the whole meeting on August 17, 2020.
Thank you. Chief Gowdy?
My apologies, I sort of skipped over that whole additional meeting piece. Yeah, I think it will be a good opportunity to review both some expectations from council, so we can get an idea there, and review the public consultation, which is usually prior to then, so it seems like a good process.
So I know we did discuss this briefly previously, or the last meeting, but if anyone has anything else additional, feel free to bring it forward. No? We have a motion before us. All those in favor? Any opposed? This as well. Thank you. Item 5.2, Planner Kirchner, you care to join us up here? We're going to be going through Bylaw 400.27 for the first reading for the Midway Crossing block rezoning. Floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you for having me. I have a brand new rezoning for council to consider for first reading, and will be requesting the scheduling of the public hearing as well. So what is being proposed is the redesignation of Lot 1, Block 1, Plan 012-3450, also known as 5230 76th Street, from future designation district to residential multi-use or multi-unit district R5. This lot is essentially part of the Midway Center development. It was one of the out parcels, but was included in the basic outline for that future development. This rezoning will facilitate the future redevelopment of this property for multi-unit residential purposes, and it is located within the Midway Center outline plan for multifamily residential development as well. The parcel is located on the west side of 76th Street, north of Highway 12 and east of Highway 2 and the Highway 12 interchange. The location of the property is shown on the next page of the slide up there, and is outlined in pink. So there are two out parcels. This one is the north of the two, and it currently contains a single-family dwelling and associated agricultural buildings that were connected to the overall agricultural use. The whole quarter section was used for the last 100+ years. So the property is located both within the Midway Center outline plan and the West Area Structure Plan. The outline plan provides detailed planning for the quarter section and indicates that the entire development will be primarily commercial with areas selected for high-density residential development. Midway Center outline plan was adopted by council in 2016 and is currently undergoing its first phase of development. So rezoning for the first phase has been completed, and it has officially been registered with land titles, so those lots exist, and an issuance has occurred for the first development permit. The parcel itself is 1.103 hectares and would be able to accommodate multi-unit housing. The rezoning aligns with the existing R5 parcel located directly north of the lot and would enable some sort of consistency when they do choose to develop both this lot and the one to the north. The surrounding area contains commercial, multifamily, residential development, and a vast open space network, which includes extensive environmental reserves protecting Whelk Brook. The next page just gives a highlight of the existing zoning in the area. So the zoning in place for the first phase of Midway Center outline plan contains commercial uses, environmental reserve, municipal reserve, and public utility lot. And the surrounding areas are predominantly zoned FD future designation, with the exception of the one commercial lot located directly east along 50th Avenue. The proposed rezoning aligns with the intent of the West Area Structure Plan and what is proposed in the Midway Center outline plan for this lot. And administration therefore supports this proposed rezoning. We're presenting Bylaw 400.27 for first reading, and we're requesting that the public hearing be scheduled for 5:30 p.m. on Monday, January 13th, 2020.
Councilor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So I'm assuming that the acreage to the south is still owned by the family, or else we'd be doing both at the same time?
Correct. The north lot was sold a couple of years ago. The other one is still being utilized for its original intent, so single-family dwelling.
So while I'm on the train of thought, I'll make the motion that council get first reading, sorry, to Bylaw 400.27 as presented.
Thank you. Anybody require any clarification? I will call the question, and all those in favor? Unanimous, thank you. And for public hearing, Councilor Goldson?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll move that council schedule a public hearing for Bylaw 400.27 at 5:30 p.m. on Monday, January the 13th, 2020.
Thank you. And for the public hearing portion of that motion, all those in favor? Unopposed? Thank you. Thanks, Madam Pritchard. We've got some members in our gallery that are interested in this next item. Did you care to come up here and sit up here? Are you okay in the gallery where you're at?
I'm good here, thank you.
Very good. I think that our manager of economic development is going to be presenting. I don't know that we necessarily need an introduction in this room, but we appreciate you showing up here as a former councillor. And the floor is yours. You whenever you'd like.
So good evening, Mayor Creasy and Council. This evening, administration is providing a brief summary of the recent updates to the affordable housing strategy. Council has asked for the affordable housing strategy to be renewed as part of its strategic plan. The city worked with BASA Social Innovations to complete a housing needs assessment that was subsequently used to inform the affordable housing strategy. As Council is aware, while our previous strategy was effective in advancing programs like Habitat for Humanity and the Down Payment Assistance Program, it was constructed on outdated information from the 2006 federal census. This update was meant to bring the information more in line with current realities. The needs assessment underscored 4 key housing issues. Those are housing affordability, ownership and rental diversity, aging in the home, and finally, people living in vulnerable situations. In response to these issues, the committee has proposed 4 goals meant to respond to these concerns. And again, they're fairly self-explanatory: increasing affordable rent and ownership supply, rental subsidies, expanding seniors' options, as well as investigating permanent supportive housing solutions. At their November 12th, 2019 meeting, the Affordable Housing Committee accepted the revised strategy and requested for it to be brought forward to Council this evening for final acceptance. The committee has also set a tentative schedule for next steps, subject to Council acceptance this evening. And just a couple of those are that the RFEOI submission deadline would be February 29th, 2020, and that we would plan to bring final project selections to Council for April 2020. As a result of this work, the province did supply an additional $153,000 in funding support. It should be noted that the funding does not require a municipal match, as the proponent's financial commitment can be utilized to meet this requirement. Administration is recommending Council accept the Affordable Housing Strategy as information this evening. And with that, I'm open to any comments or questions you may have.
Thank you, Manager Lapointe. Any questions or comments for Manager at this point? Councilor Hoekstra, go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I have a few questions. I read this article in detail. Thank you very much for presenting it to us. I find it very intriguing, but I guess after I read it all, I wondered why. Why? I know we should have a strategy as part of our strategic plan regarding affordable housing, but I guess the most compelling reason I was saying why is that it was talking about having, when you have rental options, let's just pick on that one. It says if you have more rental options, then potentially your municipality will grow. And yet your examples that were in the strategy showed that there's lots of growing municipalities that have low rental options. So I wondered why. I wasn't convinced that we should have more rental type options for growth. Does that make sense? Like comparing to Black Falls and Chestermere. Those are 2 booming little community or bigger communities, but they don't have very many rental options. Whereas like a Camrose has tons, 34% or something, but yet their growth rate was only 8%. So I guess I'm going, so what is the reason that I should be convinced that we should invest in more rental options? That would be one of my questions. Then in the very beginning, and I did get this clarified, but I wondered if anybody else had this question. Right at the beginning of the report, it says affordable housing, this is in the introduction, affordable housing refers to shelter, both rental and ownership, that once developed does not require ongoing subsidies. So I had that statement in my head the whole time I was reading the report, and then I kept reading about subsidies. And so I guess I wouldn't mind clarification there, even though I know the clarification. What subsidies are you referring to there? So I have those 2 questions at this point. Why should we increase our rental options when it doesn't clearly produce growth? And what does this mean about the subsidies in that introduction?
So I think I might answer the first part, which is actually not one of your 2 questions, about why we need an affordable housing strategy. And, I think it was Councilor Jacobson who talked about how the information was outdated and directing people in the wrong direction on the previous document. Even though we've had some success, there's an acknowledgement that the data was old. So I think the committee really wanted to be committed to an effective plan, and we also understood that there might be some funding support that would come as a result of this. So we undertook the study for selfish purposes as well. On the rental side of things, I think, anecdotally, when we talked to some of the focus groups that were there, Cost of living is definitely an issue within the community. And so there are people who want to live and work within this community that simply can't afford to live within this community. So the rentals, finding ways to increase rentals is great. Finding ways to subsidize those rentals may allow those people to live and work within our community as well.
Councillor Connor.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I sit on this committee, and these are the 4 key housing issues that were identified. That's not to say we're going to address all of them, because clearly with $430,000, that's going to be difficult to do. I would agree with you in some respect that I don't know if affordable renting is kind of the issue. I mean, when the original affordable housing strategy came out, we didn't have any new apartment buildings in this town at all, and since then we've had 3 go up. So I would argue there, from my perspective at least, I believe the aging piece, aging in the home, is probably something that needs a little more addressing than the rental issue. So to your question, I think this will go back to our committee, and then we'll identify an area that we think the focus should maybe go forward on. It'll depend on I suspect, on some of these proposals that come back to us. But like I said, there's no way we can address all 4 of these issues. Which one we do at the end of the day remains to be seen.
Go ahead.
Sorry, if I just may comment. Over in Trinity Crossing, there is one of the new apartments that you're referring to, Councillor Connick. Labour Developments has told us that is the only apartment building that they have in Central Alberta that has a wait list. So that may speak to some of the demand that you're talking about.
Councillor Jacobson.
Sure. So in terms of either strategies or ideas to address these 4 issues, are you relying simply on your RFP, or does the committee itself, have some of its own ideas and initiatives too?
I think we would be relying on the RFVOI simply because we want to find people that we can partner with to deliver these issues on these issues. In the past, I think we actually referenced specific programs, and that may have pigeonholed us into certain areas. That the last strategy actually spoke to Habitat for Humanity and the down payment assistance program. We delivered on both those programs, and you're very familiar with the fact that one of those required a lot of work in order to make it happen. So I think we'd be relying on the private sector to sort of fill in some of those gaps for us and come up with creative ways for us to address these issues.
Did these consultants give you any ideas as to policy changes that the city could undertake, specifically with this land use bylaw, to encourage this kind of affordable type of development?
Yes, and I think some of those are references in those actions that we've taken as well. So we'd like to propose that some of this actually gets siphoned into the municipal development plan and land use bylaw as we can. We referenced pocket neighborhoods, I think was one of the things that comes to mind. And that, of course, is going to increase density and allow for maybe greater aging in place in established neighborhoods. So there are some items that we would like to see move into other planning documents within the city.
Mm-hmm. So not that anybody's asking my opinion, but I will share with you, I have a tremendous amount of experience, as you had referenced in this, and also dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. It is my opinion that the only way to truly reliably make housing more affordable in any kind of fashion that's even remotely sustainable, other than a sustained downturn in the economy for 25 years, is to simply increase your supply. So I truly believe that council should consider in the future, on recommendations from Affordable Housing Steering Committee or whoever, policies for the land use bylaw that will allow for increase in supply, and that specifically relates to an allowance for increase in density in areas of town that are suitable for it, either new or dilapidated areas. Things that will allow for the economic development of rental housing, for developers, because of course the more new rental product you bring on, the existing rental properties become cheaper and cheaper, because that's how the market works, right? Also, when it comes to new single detached housing, perhaps the consideration of a new zoning that allows for, frankly, even smaller houses, only in new areas, of course, right? Because again, the cost of construction has only gone up. The only swing you have with that is how small you can slice the land. And I can tell you, being out there, there still is a high demand for people who want single-family housing and new, right? So again, that's my 2 cents, but I believe, food for thought in your discussions down the road.
Manager LaPointe, so just for clarification, the $430,000 that was referenced here, is that the total funds that the committee has access to, or these are the new funds?
That is with the additional $153,000 added into the mix at this point. So it's total funds available to us at this point.
Thank you. Chief Cuddy.
Just to be clear, the entire expenditure that the city's made on affordable housing in the last 6 years is like 1 million, 1.2 million with this 400,000, is that right?
And the initial budget was in the order of 1.3 million that we had available to us. That was including our match. And so we had approximately $300,000 left before we added this 150 back in. So yes, roughly $1 million.
Councillor Connacht.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just speaking to Councillor Jacobson's comments, there were a number of things identified within the report that talked about increasing densities such as garden suites and that type of thing. And a lot of that we've addressed in the land use bylaw, but to your comment, there was some comments about tiny homes and that type of thing, that type of development. We don't have that as of yet in the community, and maybe that is something going forward in terms of some zoning that we can do, because that seems to be all the rage anyways, these tiny homes, and maybe there's some potentials there.
Director Juke, did you have?
Just a comment, if I may. I just want to draw attention to the appendix, page 12 of the report, where you'll see a list of 13 actions, and a number of the comments that councillors are making are actually contained in those 13 actions. So just to reiterate, there's 4 goals through which, and 2 strategies being applied to those 4 goals, and 13 potential actions for the Affordable Housing Committee to take, which includes many of the things that councillors are identifying here.
Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. And I guess it was goal number 2 that I was looking at. It says promote growth of rental inventory, including a range of properties designated for subsidies. So I was just wanting that goal to be reconciled with that statement in that first introductory paragraph where it says that we want to have properties that do not need subsidies. And I guess just to make sure that the reader understands the difference between the 2 subsidies, if you will. Do you know where I'm going now? Because I guess that wasn't addressed in the introductory paragraph. Affordable housing refers to shelter, both rental and ownership, that once developed does not require ongoing subsidies. And yet goal number 2, but it still should be clarified which kind of subsidies are we dealing with there.
So when we talk about...
I'd just like to remind you that we are, of course, if I just have you state your name for the benefit of the people watching on their computers at home. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Odi Kite, and I chair the Affordable Housing Steering Committee. I'll speak loud, is that okay? Yes. Okay. So when we talk about affordable housing in terms of provincial or federal government, we talk about affordable housing in that once it's developed, it's self-sustaining, that it doesn't need any operational subsidies from the municipality, provincial or federal government. Okay, so that's the definition of the first sentence. And then when we talk about subsidies with apartments, the committee talked about an option, for example, for us to approach a landlord who owns an apartment building, and if we designate, for example, $200,000 towards rent subsidies, we would make a contract with that landlord and say, would you work with us in a partnership and we can rent, let's say, 10 apartments of yours where we will provide affordable housing, so that the rent, instead of it being $1,200, could be $750 or $800 or $900, and the subsidy makes up the difference, so that the landlord still gets full market rent, but people in the community who can afford that rent still can have affordable rent because of the subsidy. Okay.
Did that satisfactorily answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you, Odie.
Thanks.
Appreciate the clarification. She declined my offer initially, but it was nice that she chose to come up and
Very helpful.
provide some information, so we appreciate it. Any other questions or concerns? Councillor Connick?
No, again, I'm pleased with the update. Again, we were relying on old census data, and I'm glad that we've gone this route. And to that end, I think now we have a clear idea of where we can or possibly go in the future. And to that end, I also move that council accept the updated affordable housing strategy as information. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that. I was referring to that item Director Juke had pointed to. I think it's on page 12. One of the actions under the goal number 1, which is to increase affordable rental and home ownership housing supplies. The item 1A 2 says emphasize a steady municipal funding commitment of $500,000 over a period of 10 years. So it doesn't really necessarily identify what those funds were intended to be used for. Is that for rental subsidy, or to be used to leverage to provide for provincial and federal funding, or what was the end result of that funding?
Well, we're talking about $50,000 a year. Is it $500,000 per year for 10 years?
I can speak to it if you
Please
want me
do,
to.
thank you.
The committee felt that it was important to have a regular, stable source of funding to basically fund some of these initiatives that we'd like to take on an ongoing basis into the future. So it could be subsidies, it could be capital projects. In a lot of ways, we were kind of looking at it in the same way as the DART program is being funded at this point, where we could have a sum of money that perhaps isn't $50,000 a year, but maybe it's $150 every 3 years or something, where council can slate it in. And so that was the idea. Again, we didn't say commit to it, we also said emphasize it at this point, understanding that we wouldn't want to see you making that commitment this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Hoekstra.
Thank you, it's me again. I did really love this document. I might have come out being critical of it, but on page 9, I think citizens would kind of gloss over when they're looking at this document, but the housing affordability, that second paragraph underneath there has amazing stats in it, and it really, it shows to us why people can't afford housing, and those of us that have lived long enough to experience buying houses when they're only worth $80,000, we know why we could afford a house and the younger generation can't. So that paragraph in and of itself, I just found had such excellent information if we ever wanted to say, why do we need to engage in this process of providing affordable housing like Councillor Jacobson was referring to.
Very good. So Councillor Connick has put forth a motion to accept this report as information. I see no additional input, so we'll vote on that now. All those in favor? And opposed? Thank you. Manager LaPointe and Audi as well. Appreciate it. This brings us down to item number 5.4 for our 2020 operating budget. Chief Gowdy, would you start that item off for us, please?
Yes, I would, thank you. So this evening I'm presenting the requested 2 additional operating budget scenarios. Council requested these at the November 12th meeting, I'm sure you'll recall. The recommended motion is to maintain the policy compliant 1.4% for operating budget that was reviewed prior, the 1.4% increase. However, we have provided as well a number of options should you elect to do otherwise. Option A, I will go through just a couple of assumptions. Assumption number 1 in preparing the scenarios that are before you this evening was that the tax rate increase will be equivalent to the utility rate increase. So if there's a 0% tax rate increase, utility rates would also be frozen. We've presented a number of a chart that shows the different transfers to reserves in those scenarios, should you elect to make those changes. And they're all within your capacity to do so. Assumption number 2 is that the tax rate increase is equivalent to the cost of living allowance afforded to employees of the city of Lacombe, and that council maintain an alignment between this tax rate increase and the cost of living allowance. With those in mind, option A includes a 1.4% tax rate increase as well as a 1.4% cost of living allowance for city staff. Of course, that is the option that you previously reviewed, and it was a balanced budget with revenues equaling the expenses. Option B is to reduce the tax rate increase to 0.9% and correspondingly reduce the cost of living allowance, or I should say concurrently, the cost of living allowance for city staff, 2.9% from the proposed 1.4%. This results in a shortfall from the original presentation of the budget of $20,000. Option C is a 0% tax rate increase with a corresponding 0% staff cost of living allowance, which results in a shortfall of $57,000. Now, the actual revenue and expenses are identified for each option, or the impact of the revenue and expenses. So you see that they are largely offsetting one another. So even though there's under a 0% tax increase, for example, although you realize over $200,000 less of revenue than you previously budgeted, you're also saving approximately $150,000 on staffing costs. We've presented a number of proposed reductions to fund any shortfalls that arise from council's election of a alternate tax rate increase outside of the taxation preparation policy. And I would recommend, in terms of the process here, that maybe we would start with getting direction on what the percentage tax rate increase is and the percentage cost of living allowance, and then go through the options that have been presented to fund any arising shortfall, should there be one. Mauricio, or Senior Manager Reyes, also prepared a handy calculator for me in case that there is an interest in council to look at other options, such as a 0.7 or a 0.5 or a 1.2, or even decoupling the two cost of living allowance and tax rate increase, although I don't recommend that. I will leave it to council from there.
Thank you, appreciate that. So certainly if there's any comments, we can entertain those now. If not, I think what we would do is perhaps do a vote on the proposed taxation change, starting with the higher end, 1.4, and then work down from there through the options to see what the level of interest is and where our priorities lie. Councilor Ross, you had something?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I guess one comments that I've heard back from citizens is the area of concern is comparing the public to the private sector of salary increases, and that's as much as I feel personally affected by the employment. Also, going into this, we created policy, and when I feel we create policy, I would prefer to stay consistent to what policies we create. But in defense of comparing public and private sector, some people's concerns are quite justified. I guess is their calculator that if we left at a 1.4 but had a less increase of our COLA increase to staff, because as much as the rate of inflation, what we choose as of July 1st, in light of the economy now, do we really think it's going to be much different moving forward in 2020? If we come up to 2020 for budget deliberations, I think as Councillor Jacobson recommended, having some better process of pre-budget deliberations for committee meetings, I think would serve the process to be more consistent and listening to the concerns of our department heads and our citizens then, and finishing it by properly scheduled as we could have. But I guess one of the options wasn't really varying tax increase as a 1.4 and COLA being less. Is that an option? And we're keeping the tax increase at 1.4, varying the staff increases, because that's the only feedback I've ever heard citizens get back is in that area. Because when we come start to discuss budgets for 2021 next year, are we going to lower our, because we state policy the first 2 years, because if our economy doesn't pick up, are we going to, okay, we should be lower than CPI, and when are we going to have to catch up? If we don't stay with CPI, we do it 2 years in a row, because I really don't see this economy, and it'd be awesome if it changed, but to have this economy, we can be dealing with this next year, where if we have a 1.5% CPI next year, we're going to say, okay, let's bring it back down to 0.9, and we're not meeting CPI, and we have capital projects that we've been discussing of a public works building and fire hall. We're going to have to readdress our 10-year capital plan if we don't stay with the policy of CPI. Maybe that's a question I could say to CEO Gowdy. If we don't stay with CPI, are we going to meet our long-term capital plans that we've had an area of interest that we want to maintain? For example, public works, fire hall, CME trail. Are we going to have to readjust that if we don't stay with CPI?
So I'll let him formulate a response to that. I would suggest that there, for first to keep in mind, this is for the operating budget.
Yeah, I know we spoke about that, but is our tax increase in the operating budget going to affect our long-term capital and other areas of our finances?
Chief Cody?
So, yeah, definitely any, I guess our 10-year capital plan has been prepared with the expectation, or with the assumption that the policy was adhered to. So we would revisit that, I guess, if, well, we will be revisiting the 10-year capital plan anyway as we move into next year's planning cycle, and so that would be worked into. I would say definitely would make it more challenging. I can't say yes, 3 projects will get pushed off. I'm not sure of the exact implication, but having less money coming in definitely makes your ability to make projects happen that much harder. You had also asked a question, are we able to decouple the two? Yes, you can. You could do a different tax rate increase than the cost of living allowance. I think that the morale impact to staff is probably larger if you decouple those two, but that would be the only caution that I would give.
Councillor Conick?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. First, I'd like to thank administration for coming back to us with these different scenarios. I appreciate that. And I do agree with Councillor Jacobson that going forward, that's something we can certainly talk about more in the summer next year. A couple of comments I wanted to make. I my only, so it's great we have this policy in place, and I appreciate that. I just, for me, it's a benchmark. I think we have to be really, really careful that we say this is where we want to be. It can be no more, it can be no less, that's it. And then to say that if we don't hit that target, that we'll have these worst case scenarios, and we'll fall behind, and to me that rhetoric, it kind of bothers me a little bit, because for example, we haven't even done next year's budget, for example, and we already save 140,000 because we don't have Bolt. That's what we're paying for Bolt next year, the year after we don't have that. So we're already, we can make it up. So when I hear that rhetoric, it kind of bugs me a little bit. The only caution that I want to make when we talk about CPI, and I pulled it up here for the last, I'm going to go back to 2007. 2007, of course, boom times, good times. CPI was 6%. So by that scenario, then we would be looking at a 6% tax increase with a 6% COLA, because that's the policy. Now, it might have been good times back then, but I can tell you that wouldn't be met with much enthusiasm on the streets of Lacombe. So that's my only caution. I don't want to get caught in this trap that this is the policy and we can't bend from the policy because we'll fall behind or any of this, because I look at any of these years, 2014, it was up to 4% almost in that given cycle of the year. Yes, by July 1st, when we extrapolate the data, it might be a different number, but I'm just looking at in that time frame where CPI was. Conversely, 2009, CPI was at negative 2.0. So are we suggesting then we would come back with a 2% tax decrease that year and a 2% cut to COLA? I doubt it. So that's my only caution. This is wonderful that we have this new policy in place, and it's kind of where the standard we want to be at. But to say cut and dry that it's that or nothing, I have an issue with. So to that end, I won't support 1.4. I had sent an email earlier to CEO Gowdy looking for a different scenario, much like Councillor Ross had put forth, a little bit different. I said, well, can we do a 0% tax increase and just shave COLA to 0.9? Like not tie the two together. What would that look like? But then the shortfall is $153,000. So I'm glad I had that information. I thought, okay, I've never said that there should be zero COLA. I said we should do a little bit less, and I was kind of hoping that kind of scenario, but that one won't, clearly that's a big shortcoming to come up with 153,000. At any rate, I'm partial to the 0.9, at least it's less than the 1.4. Again, I don't want us to get tied to the CPI and say that's it, there's no bend, there's no give there, right? I think our citizens would appreciate a little less tax increase. I know I would as a ratepayer. Anything we can do in this economy, I think, will help. And those are just, and I think at a $20,000 shortfall, I think we can easily do a couple things here that will easily make that up, and it'll be quite, it'll be good. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Connick. So, just in reference to the question about whether or not it will affect future projects, to be quite blunt, of course it will. But so will a 20 or 25% reduction in MSI. Will have significantly more impact on our rates here, and I think out of respect for those of paying the bills in the city of Lacombe, I certainly would prefer to see it below the 1%. In this case, we've chosen 0.9. I think that's a palatable level of increase. Some will argue it's only 0.5% less than what we had said, but I think it shows that we are in fact listening, and we've put in an awful lot of effort to try and cut the budget down in places where I'm not suggesting there was a whole lot of fat to be cut, but we found some very creative ways in reducing costs and whatnot, which I appreciate, and I think that would be a reasonable route to go, but certainly look forward to seeing what everybody else has to say as well. Councillor Hibbs, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Yeah, I would echo the comments made by Councillor Connick about the policy definitely being, in my reading, a maximum, not a that's the gold standard. I do appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion. I think that when we're looking at what we do set for a rate, we do have to take the current context into play, because of course that CPI is, outdated. Like it's a number that's happened already. And so I think that it's worth looking at, for example, real GDP in 2019, we're almost at the end of it now, so they're able to make those adjustments. They've changed it. It's 0.8. It's less than 1% increase. So I mean, that says something, right? That says that our economy isn't going gangbusters like it had in the past. People are struggling and are looking for a little bit of relief. And honestly, I think 0.9 is a very reasonable sort of amount, sort of like a compromise, if you want to call it that. I'd also like to, point you to the forecasting I've seen for the same for 2020. We worry about falling behind, and honestly, I really don't think that's going to be an issue by the forecasts that I've been reading. So I think that, again, echoing Councillor Connick, I think we can make that up, when we need to. But I think we can't live in great fear that that's going to be the case, because, forecast after forecast is saying that our economy is not about to take off. Inflation's not about to go through the roof, and I think that our ratepayers deserve us to be listening to what they're saying. They're saying they're struggling and they need some relief. And I think that we have some options here that are not going to be drastic service cuts. We've already done some of those, you could argue. I'd like to see us do 0.9.
Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I guess I too echo some of those comments, but my concerns would lie with some of the proposed reductions in order to make that real. I wouldn't endorse exiting the bolt early. I think we've already disappointed our neighbors enough to come once again to them and say, well, I think we're going to try to do that even a little earlier. I think that would be a difficult discussion, and I wouldn't really want to be part of it. The Community Builder Fund, I believe in that fund, and to have it sit at $15,000 basically says to our community that it doesn't work, that we don't want to support anything. But the comments in the discussion of this strategic plan alignment, like there are some shortfalls in the city that we haven't realized. So in our new budget regarding the changes with Parent Link, but also Heritage Resources isn't mentioned here, whether we are going to support them at all in the future. So that's when my concern goes back, that we still need that 1.4 in revenue. So I'm kind of all over the place, I admit, but I do appreciate the comments about listening to our ratepayers, but yet we still have some obligations as a municipality to provide the services.
Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Some members will pointed out by Councillor Connick, thank you for that information from the past of CPI, that it would not make sense not to deviate from policy, but I think there's far more consequence to the provincial budget, that all due respect to administration. For example, it was not, as Councillor Hoekstra represented, the 70,000 from, Heritage Resources is not in factor. They also, which came out in the media a week or two ago, of which, all due respect to Councillor Connick, you would have to deal with the budget if the provincial government increases the percentage of what they retain from the police service issuing of tickets. The percentage currently is, my apologies, is 25% or 30, and was going to increase to possibly 40. So that would be dealing with another department budget shortfall if that is not. So that is two areas that I think, all due respect to a lot of areas that there's a lot of issues still coming out about the provincial budget. It's just not October 24th. There's been other programs cut. There's other departments that I think have not been addressed that are worst case scenarios. That, all due respect, I think there's 70,000 there. There's how much, but 10% come across if fines were not part of the revenue of the police service. That we'd also have to address, that leaving it at CPI would give us that cushion, for example, that I would feel more confident doing next year after a second year going into 2 provincial budgets, knowing hopefully that the provincial government's going to be more consistent to their initial budget next year than doing less this year.
I appreciate your comments, but just for clarity, with respect to the Lacombe Police Service, once the budget is set by council, it's up to the Lacombe Police Commission to operate within their means. Councillor Jacobson.
Sure. I'm going to be the outlier here, I guess. So just a couple of clarifications on some stuff I've heard here. Actually, so Alberta's GDP is contracted by 0.8% this year. So we're in a recession. And GDP is different than CPI, which is, of course, price inflation. So just some clarification on that. And I want us all to maybe just take a pause here and realize we're talking about a difference of less than $200,000 any way we slice it. And someone wise once told me, you got to realize when you're winning. And with all due respect, a discussion about 6% when maybe we're only looking at 3 versus 1.4 and 0.9 or 0 is much different. And I would wholly concur that if we had a 6% CPI, that it would be very impalpable to raise it that much, especially if it wasn't necessary. So I'm not really that worried one way or the other about can we make it through this year or even next time. I'm not worried about CPI increasing that much. What I am more worried about is additional provincial funding cuts because of perhaps things don't pan out, and then we have to have the discussion of okay, well our CPIs there isn't that much, but now we're going to have to talk about maybe a little bit more significant service level cuts or a more substantial tax increase. What's the likelihood of that happening? I don't know. But I think it's more likely than getting CPI of 3.5–4%. Okay, and again, it's my experience that these tiny little decisions, one way or the other, just tend to snowball because it's very easy to make a decision to lower even by a little bit, which is a very good gesture, and as everybody's acknowledged, is not going to be significant dollars-wise to the city, but will perhaps be very significant to some families who are the ratepayers. And of course, there'll be a tremendous amount of positive feedback when that happens, which of course reinforces the notion that, perhaps it's better to make more populist decisions as opposed to best decisions, in my opinion. And again, I believe, I would concur that the policy of spending to CPI is a benchmark, but again, in this case, because we're only talking about 1.4%, I don't think there's a lot of room in there to wiggle around. So I am in support of 1.4%, but I am actually also in support of some cuts. Because as Councillor Hoekstra said last week, I also do believe in cuts. And one of the things that I honestly just cannot square in my discussions, and I do apologize as I realize half the people in this room are staff, but I can't explain to people why we're increasing their taxes to pay for a cost of living allowance when the province is in recession. I just can't. It's impossible for me to explain it. I know the reasons why. I understand the policy retaining its staff. I understand, and honestly, if you really do the research, there's a lot more good mathematical reasons to follow that policy than not. But it's just one I can't get my head around. And clearly, there's enough discrepancy in opinion here that I don't think the policy actually even reflects the will of this council. Because if this is our policy and there's this much differing of opinion, I don't think it accurately reflects what we think about it either. But I confess I haven't thought of anything elegant that would be a solution other than simply, if we're in recession, coal is not there, but as long as we're not in recession, coal is at CPI. But I'm not making that motion right now. Comments are, so I am in favor, frankly, of a cut to the bolt if it's simply done in a friendly gesture, as if we would like this. If you're not willing to accommodate, no sweat, but it would be great if you could accommodate us. I think that would be $40,000 is $40,000. But for the reasons I've said, and for reasons of predictability for administration to budget for the long term, knowing that council will essentially follow, maybe not to the ceiling, but certainly within reason, the CPI, I am in favor of the 1.4%.
Very good. So we've all had some input on the three possible scenarios. other than the light that never seems to work from Councillor Gullikson.
Works fine, you just can't see it.
Exactly. Councillor Gullikson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I also think that the 1 point, or CPI should be our guideline, and our goal should be 0. And I know that isn't always possible. But the discussion around the table about the 1.4, I think the optics of going 1.4 right now for a tax increase would be poor for us. Even though it's not a lot of money, I think the 0.9 would show that we're showing restraint, and in this economic times, I think we need to be in that position as a council. I also feel that we're not talking a lot of money here either way. I think it's optics, and I think it's important for us to show that restraint as a council. I do like the idea of having that guideline of the CPI for our top end, but with a goal for 0 at any time when we're looking at our tax increases.
Thank you. So as stated earlier, I think we're going to have a vote on the 3 different scenarios because that's what we asked for. We'll start out with the 1.4, move on to the 0.9, and then to the 0. And maybe only the first one we need, whatever the case may be. Everybody okay with that? Councillor Hibbs?
So just for process, I mean, what I think you're saying is going to happen is somebody will have to put forward a motion for 1.4, and then we'll vote on it, and if it fails, then we move on. Ideally, somebody else makes a motion for a different, is that how we're doing it?
That's
okay.
certainly what I was hoping for.
Brilliant, all right, thank you.
Who would like to begin? Councillor Jacobson?
Sorry, I don't have the motion in front of me, but I'll... Oh,
I
okay.
think you can make one up.
Yeah. Okay, I move that Council direct administration to return the operating budget, including 1.4% increase to the December 9th meeting for final adoption.
Thank you. No additional input? All those in favor? All those opposed? That is defeated. Next. Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I will make the motion that Council directs administration to return the operating budget, including a 0.9% increase to the December 9th meeting for final adoption.
Councillor Jacobson?
Oh, sorry.
Well, motion before us at the 0.9% level. All those in favor? I was a little slow on the draw there. Was that?
Halfway.
Very good. Let's have a show of those who are in favor of that last motion. So okay, that was 4, obviously 2, 3, then so that is carried at 0.9. So that will come before us for the December, was it 9th meeting?
That's correct.
Consideration then? Very good. Councillor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just to ask administration CEO a question for the $70,000 shortfall to the Heritage Resources, I think. What's our options of dealing with that we was not presented in this scenario, that we know that that's going to be a shortfall moving forward from the provincial budget?
So we did reach out to the community groups that we knew were affected by the provincial budget and asked them to provide us any new estimates that they would want considered in this budget. They have not presented anything that they've requested that we present this evening. So if there is any impact that they want additional funding from the City of Macomb, that'll come at the spring adjustment.
Councillor Connick?
Thank you, Mayor Christie. I don't know if CEO Gotti was looking for suggestions tonight yet on the $20,000 shortfall.
We certainly need to be going through all of those items, absolutely.
Okay, well, I was just going to suggest the number 4 and 5, the building maintenance for the fire hall and City Hall, that comes to your 20,000. And I would agree with Councillor Jacobson, that doesn't hurt in the meantime see if we can get out a bolt a little earlier, and then that 40,000 could perhaps address heritage if need be down the road, perhaps, but it doesn't hurt to ask about.
So why don't we go through all of these to see what everybody's input is. The first one, the contribution, number one, contribution to operating reserve. It's only $3,000. Is there, let's get a bit of an indication here. If consider it yes, no?
You want to straw poll?
Sure.
My thumbs up, okay.
Yep. Okay. Bolt, early exit, there was some talk previously with that, and I would just like some clarification. So this is basically just asking the partners if in fact they will, because I thought we had a fairly clearly defined contract that outlined the exit strategy for any of the parties, so I'm just a little confused as to how this would be possible.
So there is a clearly defined exit strategy within the contract. However, at the operations level, there was some discussion about a possible early exit. And so I don't think it would come as a complete shock if the city were to make that request.
Very good. Do we have anything on that item? Okay, an indication then if in fact you'd be interested in asking this. So we can go ahead and ask. There again, there's nothing certain about that item. It's the Community Builder Fund. Chief Dowdy, go ahead.
The Community Builder Fund is governed by policy as well, the Community Builder Partnership Policy. It identifies an annual $50,000 contribution. Of course, that's been varied many times in the past due to financial capacity. In this particular instance, we're not anticipating any applications for expenditure next year. The current Community Builder Partnership grant balance with no 2020 contribution is $15,500. If there were to be a cut here, we would recommend maybe considering a partial cut rather than a full.
Anyone have any additional thoughts on the Community Builder Fund proposal? Councillor Clark?
Just a quick question is, so say, let's just hypothetically we say, yay, leave it in there, but then again, midstream next year, is there a way to, like, once we commit to that, is there a way, if there's a massive shortfall in heritage, that we can pull some of that, like say 20 out from that, and then, or?
It depends on the timing of how easy it would be. Of course, it is the community's money, and so you're the governors of that money, and you can make that happen mid-year even. It would be easiest if it were to happen at the spring adjustments, prior to the spring adjustments. If we got notification of that, then we just show a smaller contribution next year.
So then the Community Builder Fund is basically just an extension of an operating reserve. If we can pull it in and out of there as easily as we will. That seems odd to me.
So it is, so maybe I don't want to make it seem like you can just pull it in and out. There is a policy that governs expenditures from the reserve. So say it would be easiest to do at the spring operating budget. Otherwise, you're right, there would have to be a variance to policy to remove that and bring it into the operating reserve, or into the operating budget.
That certainly makes sense. So those interested in considering a reduction in the Community Builder Fund?
A reduction, but not elimination, reduction.
That was, I'm sorry, that was my intention because that's the way the administration has suggested we consider a reduction, but Councillor Hoekstra, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I guess I was curious about the historical data regarding the balance in this fund. Has it ever been at $15,000 before? I know that you said that there's been different amounts put in it during the years, but has it ever dropped this low before?
It would have been this low when it was first created, kind of like on the way up, you know, to being contributed to. Well, I guess no, because the first year would have been a $50,000 contribution. Historically, I would say, currently, the city $156,750, I believe, out for the Arts Center Foundation's acquisition of their building. Of that, of the total balance, I believe that 100,000 of that was within the last 2 years, the contribution. So within the last 2 years, over half of the contributions were made by this council.
Thank you. But can we, with integrity, still call it a community builder fund with a balance of $15,000? Like, is that a legitimate amount to say that, hey, community, we have this fund that you can access? I don't know, I guess I'm struggling with letting it drop that low and still carry on using it or having it there.
I guess the short answer is yes. There's no minimum balance that it has to be. I think they really would prefer it to be higher, but given that $150,000 just went out of it, I don't think it's unrealistic to suggest that it's that low now. So in order to give administration a bit of leeway, I think that it was a reduction that we're considering, not necessarily an elimination of the $50,000. So just as a bit of history, since the inception of this fund, I think it's been haphazard at best when the donation or the top-ups were made. And certainly the last 2 years have been the full $50,000, which I would suggest has been a little unusual over history. So without identifying a specific amount, do we want to consider a reduction in the community builder fund? Yes or no?
So your question is, do you want to consider a reduction?
Yes. So we will consider a reduction on that one, and I would suggest by the indications there, don't make it too substantial. The fire hall building maintenance and repairs item there's been $12,000 has been allocated here. Do we want to consider a reduction in this item? That one I would suggest is a yes. And the building maintenance and repairs to City Hall. Given that the item that was cited here, I'm going to suggest that it's for this room. Or primarily?
Downstairs. I think actually it's throughout the building. I know that in our photocopier room, for example, all the tiles are broken. So I would, for what it's worth, I would recommend including this one, keeping the $10,000. I think it is something that's sorely needed, and will go actually a very small way to improving the building.
You'd be surprised to hear that I'm going to speak in favor of this one too. I mean, keeping the funds, the $10,000 in there. I don't believe that we have any plans to replace City Hall in the near future, so we do need to upkeep it, I think, and make it look presentable. So, Councillor Connick?
That being said, I mean, carpet in here is livable. I mean, you want to do the photocopy room, but I mean, that number, if you could do it for less, whatever. A reduction.
So, number 5, the building maintenance and repairs at City Hall. Reduction, yes or no? I think you can leave that one the way it is, Chief Gowdy. The next one's a larger item, the asset management coordinator is nearly $100,000. And given that this is a staff-focused item, I will let Chief Gowdy speak to it first.
So this is going to help us achieve our asset management priorities, which have been identified in the strategic plan. Here, realistically, it would be quite possible for us to delay the hiring of this position until mid-year. And so I would recommend, if you're going to consider a change here, I would recommend again a reduction by half.
So we can hire half a person, or just delay it for the year, or what?
Just delay it for half the year.
Okay. Councillor Ross?
Thank you, Mauricio. All due respect, is our new financial person, is that one of his areas of his portfolio?
That is a completely different item.
Okay, my apologies. thought I read a profile that was highlighting that area.
I believe what Councilor Ross is probably highlighting, we did release some information because Senior Manager Reyes is a certified asset management professional. So certainly his experience there will be helpful as we develop our own, but it is a different area.
Okay, my apologies.
Yeah, I was just saying that's a different function, not to suggest that they aren't related, because I think the asset management is very much related to the chief financial
What's wrong with the fire?
management position. I'm just wondering if anybody can refresh my memory. I know that we have spoke about asset management in great detail. At no time do I recall the requirement for an additional staff person ever coming to light. And council was very much supportive of this initiative and all the benefits of it, but at what point did we realize that we would be in for an additional staff member?
Came to that realization over this year, actually. We had initially anticipated being able to try and do that work internally using existing resources. But when we look at the achievements we were able to make or the results we were able to get this year, when staff were largely focused on other projects and we're expecting the same for next year, I don't think it's realistic that you will get a highly functioning asset management plan that delivers a return on investment in a reasonable time frame if we're relying on internal resources. So we have also put forward the option and explored the costs to contract the development of asset management plan to a third party. If this is still a priority of council, of course, this position could be removed, and we'll make what efforts we can to progress that objective.
So just for some clarity in this position then, once the city's assets are in fact all accounted for, is this a position that will become redundant then? Is this something that's going to go on forever? Is this going to take a year or 20 years? Or what's?
I wouldn't say that asset management is really like you get to a spot where you're done and that person can go away. Certainly they'll refocus their work once the registry has been created, but there's ongoing assessment and reevaluation of the decisions and priorities and council's 10-year capital plan that this position would help with for sure.
Councilor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I would definitely speak in favor of leaving this one alone, only because I think delaying it would not be a good idea. We've had this discussion about the importance of asset management. If you attended any of the AUMA sessions on this, it was very apparent why this is a good way to go, why we need to do this, why this will actually save us money in the long term, will allow us to do much better planning. It just has so many positive outcomes. And so, yes, we could delay it, I suppose. But I mean, this is a strategic plan. We want this to happen, ideally within the time frame that was given. So I would definitely speak against making any changes to this specific item.
Councilor Connick?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I would concur with Councilor Hibbs to a point. I think, as you had mentioned, I think it's important to get that registry established, to get an idea of what our assets are, their lifespan, and so forth. I don't know then, going forward, if that's a $97,000 a year job, maintaining that registry and funneling out the 3 or 4, 5 assets a year that leave and the 6 that come in. I struggle with that a little bit. So I'm not, the only other point I want to make is that we made some comments when we were looking at, for example, police budget. There were a lot of people saying that it was unsustainable, and a lot of, I think it had to do with the fact that, we were hiring officers to get up to the level that we should be, yet every year that I have been on council, we seem to be adding bodies to our staff. Is that sustainable? I would argue maybe, that you could throw that out there as well. So I struggle with this one. I see the need, but yet I have a hard time justifying it once we've established the registry, that ongoing need at this value.
Councilor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So in light of our recent appointment of financial services, would that delay not give him a appropriate time manner to get more aware of our home city operations? And could it also be evaluated, does it worthwhile to have a third-party independent point of view by subcontracting it rather than having an internal hire? Sometimes that outside point of view from an independent contract, then you know your costs and you may not be a full-time position. I just think you could have even a third delay to allow our new director to become more familiar with our city operations. I would propose having a 3-month delay instead of a 6-month perhaps. That would allow our administration and directors to become, more time to become familiar, more options to the possibility of the options of having a independent to be done for a different opinion.
So we seem to have a few more questions about this particular item. Anybody got any creative suggestions how we're going to handle this? Councilor Ross?
I'll say cut it by a third to 60,000, or close to a third, 65,000.
I prefer a vote on leaving it as is first before we go that, because I want to see what the score of the room is for that.
Go for it.
We're just discussing possibilities so far.
Okay. Makes sense.
So as I said earlier, council did make a commitment to pursuing the asset management for the city. This one's a little bit of a surprise, I think, to most of us, that this senior position was going to be required to put it all together in a time frame that we didn't think was very aggressive. We're talking about the end of 2021. So obviously there's a substantial amount of work if we need another $100,000 a year person to coordinate this. In saying that, let's have an indication who is in favor of leaving the asset management coordinator $97,000 allotment, item number 6, as is. I was going to vote no, not that it matters, but that item will stay as it is. The increased hours for HR coordination, $13,000. Once again, this is a personnel-related item. Chief Gotti, would you care to give us the synopsis on it?
So one of the things that we've been looking at that actually your question ties in well to is the need for some more certainty as we project out our HR needs into the future, so that there isn't surprises, as you put it, coming up without knowledge. We want to look actually at a more comprehensive approach to human resources and have a 3 to 5 year plan of both our successions, make sure we have the right people in place to take over positions where we know there are incoming retirements, as well as some predictability for staffing levels. Councilor Connick had alluded to there being added position every year, sort of in your experience. And certainly that is what we would expect with a staff of around 130 people or so, 140. And growth rate of around 2.2%, you will be expecting to see 2 or 3 staff growth per year. And so it would be nice to be able to project that out and give you, as council, a sort of an idea of what that looks like over the coming years. So these increased hours will help us do that additional work in-house and free up our senior HR manager to do that work.
Okay. I've seen additional input in this item, so I'll ask those interested in leaving the HR coordination funds, the $13,000 in as is, indicate now. That will stay as is, thank you. The road patching item here, this is not to be confused with the road work that's already in our capital project. This is for the the less major items, the smaller items, I assume. Director Thompson, would you care to go over that, what it's for?
So I can. So in the 2020 operating budget, administration proposed $50,000 for road patching and spot repairs, as Mayor Creasy had alluded to. That addresses kind of localized failures or localized issues, potholes, are our example. A cut here of $25,000 would mean our crews would be focusing more on pothole repairs in the spring, and then only small repairs throughout the city is required. Essentially, it means we can do less, say, more substantial patches. For an example, the one that was recently done on Woodland Drive near No Frills cost about $34,000. So that type of patch we likely wouldn't be able to do, or we wouldn't be able to do in 2020.
Thank you. So you're suggesting that the fund saved in the community builder fund be added to this then? Is that what I heard? Councillor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I would say, please let us not do, if this is one thing that we hear so much at certain times a year, that this is definitely not the area that I would want to be cutting anything from. So that's just my 2 cents, but yeah.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. This is a very small amount of money for this type of work. I found it, I kind of laughed when I read this, that it said the asphalt repair in Woodland Drive cost $34,000, which $34,000 is still $34,000. So I probably got more compliments on that small piece of road repaired. And keep in mind that all the input we get is not always compliments. This was especially noticeable. So the $25,000 is very reasonable. I'm surprised it wasn't more actually, but I'm certainly all in favor of keeping it. I don't see any other lights on. Anybody interested in adjusting the road patching item number 8 for $25,000? Indicate so now. That will stay as is. So I think that gives sufficient direction to administration how to prepare for the December 9th presentation of the proposed adjustments to the operating budget. Anything before we move on to the next item? Very good. So, Chief Cuddy, would you care to go through your CAO report?
It wasn't a particularly eventful 2 weeks. Mauricio Reyes started with us. We did meet with some downtown businesses to discuss parking concerns they have, especially with the upcoming holiday season. So letters will be going out this week. And Director Pichet has been working with our bylaw team to make sure we are doing an enforcement blitz and enforcing that 2-hour parking in the downtown core during the holiday season. So we'll certainly be advising people of that on social media and the city's webpage, as well as during a media release as well. But I expect you will hear some feedback about that, both positive and negative. Beyond that, I guess one thing that I'm happy to report on, I've been talking about H2S issues that we've been struggling with on the regional sewer line for 2 months probably. And we finally tracked the issue to a faulty valve. One internal valve that was causing recirculation of some chemicals, and so rarely do you actually come out with a real smoking gun like that. It's very nice. So those issues are resolved. That's all I have.
That item, kind of like the 15-cent washer that brought down the shuttle. When I read it, I actually kind of an odd thing to get to be pleased about, but when I read it, we spent all the money on a properly engineered system. We have tried several different types of, like I had anything to do with it. They have tried several different kinds of chemicals to address, I forget the scientific name for the chemicals that are intended to knock the H2S out. So this was a very pleasant surprise, because it's an expensive system, so I was happy to see that come about. Was there an update with the pumps as well, or are we satisfied with the changes on that? Not to spread doom and gloom over the happy item.
The changes are going as predicted, or as planned. We are continuing to pursue compensation for the damaged pumps, and are working with the contractor before that.
Apparently I'm up for council report. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Ross.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just also pertaining to the 2-hour parking enforcement downtown, was this brought up by the downtown businesses? Because there's always been a parking bylaw for downtown, because other businesses actually brought up this in the past and nothing that was ever resolved, and all of a sudden on Christmas, when you're trying to encourage people downtown, is this an issue that the businesses brought forward, or is more in the history of this?
Specifically, one business brought it forward that they are having difficulty with long-term parking that they believe is due to staff of other businesses preventing or impacting the ability for customers to park there, close to their business. So they had actually requested that we look at creating some dedicated parking stalls for their business. We say, well, in the past, the council's been pretty consistent in not approving those kind of things. We've actually forced on people who have put up signage. And so we said, one of the things we could do would be to look at making sure there is healthy turnover of downtown parking as it was intended to, and as it's actually, there's bylaws in place to make sure that happens. So this owner seemed quite satisfied with that, and we said, we'll try it and see in the new year if there's been an improvement, or if we do need to look at other parking improvements downtown.
Any other questions for Chief Gutter's report? Councilor Connick?
Well, just to follow up on that, I guess, I wasn't going to say anything, but I think as a former business owner downtown, I had this occur on occasion where someone parked on my store all day, and they do it again. But then there's an easy solution. You phone Bylaw, they come, they run a plate, they find out it's an employee, they have a conversation, it doesn't happen anymore. So I don't know if we need a full-blown enforcement. I think there's just a few people who just need to be told, if you're an employee, park somewhere else. So I would agree, I don't know if we need a full-blown enforcement. I think just a few select investigations typically take care of this problem. That's been my experience.
So the difficulty, of course, being tying specific cars to people to the place of work can be a challenge. We are working to do that right now with our bylaw officers, going down early to see who's there. And so we are trying that route initially, but there is the need for some enforcement of that 2-hour parking limitation if we're expecting people to adhere to it. Otherwise, I think it's a fairly loose bylaw.
Yeah, but just to follow up real quick, you don't want to go, again, you don't want to be chasing people away. You know, if I was a business owner, I wouldn't want hardcore enforcement either. I want people to come and shop, and if they take 2.5 hours, that's okay. I think there's just a few bad apples that need to be, not bad apples, sorry, just a few people that just need to be reminded of the rules.
Who's up first? Councilor Hibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Not to sound like I'm trying to micromanage, and I think that administration can probably handle this, but I do recall that when trailers were being done, for example, over the summer, the enforcement there was warnings. And so all the trailers on my street all had papers on them, and it just reminded them, you're meant to move this within 72 hours. And so I assume those that didn't heed that warning, then got a little surprised. But it worked great. Like they were all gone, right? So it was just warnings.
Councillor Hoekstra?
My question was more around the communication strategy. Is the communication strategy going to be about the 2-hour parking, or that, park at the LMC and walk to shop or something like that? I guess I was curious about what is the communications that's being developed?
So it would be advising people that we will be looking to enforce the 2-hour parking, and that we have a number for them to call if there is a concern. We'll have bylaw officers actually hand delivering these notices to businesses so they can have that interaction and make sure that that business is aware of the options available to them. I'm not sure that a campaign to have customers park down at the LMC and walk to shop would be super successful. I think that's the concern of the business owners is that customers really do want that convenient, sort of within 40 feet parking is what we're seeing.
Thank you. Moving to council reports. Whatever order they come up in, that's the way we will address them. So much for that idea. All right, so not too often many items on this particular report here, given it was only for a few days. The Central Lacombe 4-HB 50th anniversary was interesting one to attend. Was there with Council House was there, and the Reeve of the county, Law was there. Brought greetings and congratulations, City Council. I think that 50 years for a youth-led organization is pretty outstanding, and there were lots of multi-generational families that were represented there, so it was good to see. The Lacombe Legion annual Remembrance Breakfast was well attended, of course on the 11th, as was the Remembrance Day services. And I had, although this is not a city event, certainly endorsed by the city and promoted and helped to facilitate it. This event does keep growing, and I think that is, like any event, there is certainly some growing pains that come along with that, and there was some suggestions made for the sound system and whatnot to coordinate perhaps better with the Legion members so that they know that the additional rooms for the county room and whatnot must make use of a microphone. You've got 150 people or whatever listening, and also they can't hear anything. It can be a little frustrating, I think. So yeah, just a little more coordination there, but overall, it was just a very well attended and good, respectful ceremony. So the Luan student welcome for the 24 Chinese exchange students who were here from the Guangdong province. Was happy to be there and welcome them on behalf of council. And one of our former city auditors retirement celebration on the 14th. Attended that event as well. And some applications there for the Municipal Planning Commission. I believe that they were both approved. And I think there was some reference there. I think their area structure plan is not complete in our Wolf Creek industrial area, so that's why that item had to come before MPC. Something that we may want to add to when the workload will allow it. I'm not sure when that would be, but that's all that I had for this reporting period. Like I said, from November 8th through the 20th. Any questions? Who's next? Councillor Hoekstra?
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. Yeah, my report's a little bit briefer and it's not entirely accurate, but anyhow, on November 18th, I met with Reeve Law with the Chamber to discuss the role of city or municipal representation on the Chamber board as a non-voting member. We had a very good, frank discussion about our role going forward, that we will work as liaisons, and they definitely maintain that we're valued members of their board. I went to the Creating Dementia-Friendly Communities workshop on November 20th. It was actually very interesting, and they had some very practical good practical tips for businesses in the city to be sensitive to people who are experiencing dementia. But then they threw out at the end some really good questions that we should always figure out what we value as a community. We want to raise our children here, but we also want to care for our seniors. And then looking at who our main, or what our main resources are as communities, and building awareness around Alzheimer's. And it was definitely well worth attending. A number of us in the room were there. I was part of the parade for the city of Lacombe on November 21st. And today I was supposed to attend a board meeting for Lacombe Foundation, but Councillor Hibbs attended in my place.
Thank you. I believe that's all the written reports we had, and I wanted to reiterate our promise to ourselves to get these into our regular meetings. So I think that we can all agree that we can do a little bit better than 2 out of 7. Let's keep that in mind for the next one. We'll finish the year off with 100%, I'm sure, right? I hope. Betcha. Did anybody have a verbal report that they would care to give at this time? Very good. We will move on to council mailbox. So the first one, the concerned resident letter regarding dog licenses. This is one, however, I have had a few that were addressed specifically to me. This individual wanted it shared with council, so, and there's some good points in there. I know that we went through this at great length, but I guess something to consider. Perhaps we want to consider another form of licensing in addition to the lifetime one. Don't expect it to be discussed this evening, but something we might want to consider. Because like I said, I think this is number 4 that I've received, and I expect that all of you have had input as well, whether it's verbal or written. And the next item, any input on that letter? Questions? Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Well, I think that from discussions I've had with Diane regarding this topic, it's come up a number of times. In this case here, I believe that if this individual would come and speak to our administration, I think that this would have been resolved prior to any letter needing to be written regarding that. I think that this whole process of us going to a one-time license is something that dog owners and all dog owners should be very appreciative of. And in this case, where it's a 14-year-old dog, of course, you could almost consider that dog as being spayed or neutered anyway. And and I'm sure that they, as all old people understand, anyway, they would, he could consider that as being done and give them the one-time license fee. And I think our administration would do that.
Thank you, Councillor Gullickson.
I'll leave it at that.
So many jobs.
We'll move on to the Lacombe Police Commission minutes. Is there any questions or comments on that submission?
That's what happens, you're done.
I believe that's all the information items that we have. We have a motion from someone? Motion? Okay, and Councillor Gullickson?
I'll make the motion, we accept this as information.
Let's conclude that one.
All those in favor? Thank you. We'll move down to item 7.1 from the November 12th regular council meeting for the approval of our minutes. Does everyone have an opportunity to review them? Any questions or revisions? Councilor Oakstrom.
Thanks, Mauricio. I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
Thank you. No corrections or? All those in favor? Unanimous, thank you. We have no notice of the motion this evening. So it is now 6:45. So we'll take a short recess here and give the press an opportunity to talk to whoever they wish, and we'll reconvene at 7 p.m. That work? Recess to when?
This was actually, well, $15 because she has microchip.